think we'd always sort of done bits that were far away from home and gardens that were far away from home, and because we'd been asked to do or had a reputation maybe for doing gardens that were a bit different, or they were difficult builds. Anybody can draw a thing on paper, but it's not everybody that understands how the build works and then draws that with that in mind. And I think because from a very young age, bearing in mind that like I did my first garden when I was 9, and I had been doing gardens on top of multi-story car parks and rooftop buildings when I was 17, but the time scales that were given to me was sort of, in hindsight, not even in hindsight, even then at the time, they were sort of ridiculous or challenging. But my brain always kind of went, well, okay, there's a way obviously to do this, we just need to figure it out. So I ended up always using, not always, but when you bring cranes in instead of shovels and wheelbarrows, no disrespect to that, it always looks a little bit fancier, and maybe I'm dumbing it down, but that got me a reputation for doing things abroad. So that always sat, and I always did those things. They just would have been private gardens, and Instagram maybe wasn't a thing. I think what ultimately happened was in 2018, I got asked to do a garden in the dried up mold of a 13th century castle, and it was 30 foot below street level, and there was no soil to come off site, and it struck all the what we know now as, or know now better as, biodiverse and climate change consideration, if I may, but that style of a garden, but not that style. And the timelines were equally ridiculous, and you sort of pull it off, and then you realised in the middle of all of this, I was actually one of 14 designers selected globally, and by default, due to my accent, I represented Ireland, and I think Fisher Tomlin and Bowyer represented Wales, and James and Helen Basson represented England. So it was sort of a funny space to be thrown into for something maybe that we'd done before. And the plan was always post that not to do a Hampton. It was the notes that I'd written down on the wall. Everything goes on the wall of my office. You write it down in chalk and then you can rub it off and start again. But I'd always planned to go, and the notes I had written down were not Hampton, not Chelsea, and not Tatton. I don't know why. And I bumped into Anna Skipnevsky Ball, the then RHS Cardiff show manager, rang Ed Burnham and a bale of other people who wanted to go on another journey, and we did that. And then we'd obviously were accepted to do Hampton 2020, which was on the board. And then things changed a little bit. We ended up doing 2 series of DIY SOS, the Big Build Ireland, which became Ireland's most watched television programme, and the gardens in that were entirely ridiculous timelines. To the point, I think that the biggest of them was just under an acre. They built the house in 10 days. We built a garden in 8. And when I first saw that field, there was a bull in it. There was no services, there was no anything. And I remember asking them, is this a double episode? And they just started laughing. And they came out the far side of that, and then you end up doing another garden in the internal courtyard of a defence castle, I should add, which is designed to keep people and machinery and landscape contractors and garden designers out. And we made that garden happen, and it was inaugurated, and then we ended up going to Melbourne. And when you sort of explain it like that, maybe it seems quite rational in my head as to how I ended up in a Melbourne scenario. But the going abroad thing isn't the challenge. and it's not always the reason. I think a lot of it's sort of who's still holding hands with you, mixed with a sort of a keep your mind occupied in a sense, but you know you're going on a good journey, you know it's going to look brilliant at the end, and there's probably, without playing it down, I think there's sometimes when you say to somebody, you know, I'm going to Nova Scotia, they sort of go, oh my God, have you ever been? You go, no, just, you know, and in this case it's Melbourne, it's very far away, but the principles, I think, of getting on with people and understanding how design and realization, as the French word, of works, sort of, if you summarize it down, it sort of comes down to an international language, which is courtesy and respect, and maybe that's goes back to how I was reared. So the daydreams are still there, the ability to turn it into equation, and then make that set of drawings equation become a reality, I think, is the bit that I love. When you're doing that with people who you adore and respect equally, I think it's quite a magic job, and it doesn't really seem like too much of a challenge. But you know, you're always trying to find what's the next one, what's the next thing to do.